Hello aspirants, welcome to UPSC Civil Services Simplified. The end of the Cold War is usually seen as the beginning of the contemporary era in world politics, or in other words to say, the beginning of era of international relations. Therefore, it is appropriate that we begin our lecture series on international relations with a discussion on the Cold War. So, the quote of Albert Einstein can be considered as the situation, or we can say the grim situation that was there after the bombing of the World War II. That I know not with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. So this quote shows the grim situation that was there during the Cold War, or we can say during the 1945s onwards, between the two superpowers, that was the USA and the Soviet Union. So our area of discussion for this particular lecture would be the background of how the Cold War started, what was the Cold War all about. Then we'll see the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is considered as the point where the Cold War actually started. Then we'll see what is the Cold War, what is Cold War all about. Then we'll see the emergence of the power blocks. After that, we'll see the arenas of the Cold War. Then we'll see the challenges to bipolarity. Then new international economic order. And at last, we'll see India and the Cold War. So let's start. The background. Unlike world wars, there is no exact date when the Cold War began, as there was never an official announcement of warfare to note the beginning of conflict. So no historians or no researchers have actually confined the date when the Cold War actually started. So Cold War started due to some circumstances. And what was the circumstance? The circumstance was that USA knew that Japan was about to surrender, but still he bombed back to back with two nuclear bombs, which shook the entire world and the entire humanity. Not only the entire world, but even the humanity was shaken, right? So Einstein also have said at one particular time that humans have developed the nuclear bombs, but no mouse can develop a mousetrap. So you can understand the severity of the nuclear bomb, or the serious threat that nuclear bomb poses, right? So many say it began after World War II, when both powers tried to settle their differences and decide what to do with Europe, while many say it began around the time of Russian Revolution in 1917. So different historians have claimed about different timelines regarding the starting of the Cold War. Many say that the Cold War began since the Russian Revolution of 1917, while some say it began after the 1945, after the bombing, right? So there is no exact date, unlike world wars, like when the Cold War started. They entered the World War II for different reasons. The Soviets because of Germany's invasion, and the United States because Hitler declared war after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, right? So United States was unlike somewhat quiet in the situation during the World War II, but when their Pearl Harbor was completely destroyed and many of their soldiers who were there on the harbor lost their life, America started in their mind that they have to destroy Japan at all cost, and they have thought that they will destroy it, right? So both were well ahead of many countries in with respect to technology, with respect to arms, ammunitions. They were all ahead of other countries, right? And they were obviously nuclear countries. In that time there were only two nuclear countries, right? So USA and Russia, sorry, Soviet Union. So they knew that nobody is ahead of us, right? However, after the World War, their similarities ended as the differences between the nations outweighed the similarities enormously. Both countries had their own ideas as to how things should have been during the period after the war, which can be seen in the Potsdam, Tehran and Yalta conferences. Also, they both tried to enforce their ideologies through events during the Iron Curtain and the Marshall Plan. Also, you might have heard a quote that two swords cannot stand in one sword stand, right? In Hindi, that is like दो तलवारें एक म्यान में नहीं समा सकती. So this was all about that. USA was also very powerful at that time, and Soviet Union was also very powerful at that time. So the conflict started when these two want to dominate over other countries, and once the ideologies also differed. The USA ideology was about capitalism, whereas the Soviet Union ideology was about socialism. So both were very, very different from each other. Actually, socialism started because of the extremism of the capitalism. When the capitalism took its huge phase, we can see that in the French Revolution also the same situation. The socialism took place because of that, right? Now we'll see the Cuban Missile Crisis. So in the earlier phase we have seen why Russia and USA got into conflict with each other after the World War II, despite being in the same allies, right? They were in the same bag before the World War during the World War II, but after World War II the situation changed, right? The Cuban Missile Crisis. In April 1961, the leaders of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic (USSR) were worried that the United States of America would invade communist-ruled Cuba and overthrow Fidel Castro and president of the small island nation off the coast of the United States. So Russia was worried because Cuba was under the Russia, used to get funds and everything from Soviet Union. Sorry, I have said Russia, from the Soviet Union. So Soviet Union was worried that USA would now invade into Cuba and took over the rule of Cuba, right? Now Cuba was an ally of the Soviet Union and received both diplomatic and financial aid from it. Therefore, Nikita Khrushchev, the leader of the Soviet Union, decided to convert Cuba into a Russian base, and in 1962 he placed nuclear missiles in Cuba. So Soviet Union was worried about Cuba, and especially the leader of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev, he decided to convert Cuba into a Russian base. So when you convert a part of land or a country into a base, you put your military and your military equipments into that particular place. Same did Soviet Union. They took off the nuclear missiles and placed it into the Cuba, right? The installation of these weapons put the US for the first time under fire from close range and nearly doubled the number of bases or cities in the American mainland which could be threatened by USSR. So if in any case the missile would have been launched from Cuba towards the US, the situation would have been very drastic. It would have been similar like Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They were destroyed completely. Similarly, USA would have been destroyed. But thank God this never took place. So if the missile nearly doubled the number of bases or cities, right? The main part of the America was under the threat with the missile that was placed in Cuba. So you can see in this map, and this map is, the source of this map is CIA. So you can see the range of missile. This is 4074. The effect of missile would have been as far as 4074 kilometers from Cuba, and the main effect where there would have been nothing, no signs of humanity, would be around 1167 kilometers. So this was the severity of the nuclear missile, or the threat of the nuclear missile that was placed in Cuba, and which became attention for the USA. So 3 weeks after the Soviet Union had placed the missile weapons in Cuba, the Americans became aware of it. So after 3 weeks, American came to know, oh my god, we have a nuclear missile right beneath our country, that is Cuba. Right? The USA President John F. Kennedy and his advisors were reluctant to do anything that might lead to a full-scale nuclear war between the two countries. So they knew the consequences or the consequences of the war. Every country has seen the consequences of the nuclear bombing, right? So the bombing of nuclear is not a beneficial to one country or another country. Actually, in a war, it's not about victory, it's all about who survives, right? So full scale nuclear war between the two countries, but they were determined to get Khrushchev to remove the missile and nuclear weapons from Cuba. So USA was reluctant, or it was hesitating to get into another war, or to say nuclear war, because that would have been a nuclear war. Yes, it would have been a nuclear war for sure. So USA was hesitating to do it, but it was reluctant. It was confident that we have to get this missile off from our head. We have to remove this missile at all cost. So it was putting in pressure on Khrushchev, the leader of the Soviet Union, to remove this missile. Right? Kennedy ordered American warships to intercept any Soviet ships heading to Cuba as a way of warning the USSR of its seriousness. A clash seemed imminent in what came to be known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. So USA as a repercussion, or you can say as a result, loaded its warships, and it put it in warships to stop all the ships that were coming towards the Cuba, that were coming towards Soviet Union, all the ships of the Soviet Union that were coming towards Cuba, right? So this clash and this heat between USA and Soviet Union came to be known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. The prospects of this clash made the whole world nervous, for it would have been no ordinary war. But eventually, to the world's great relief, both sides decided to avoid war. So Soviet Union was also reluctant. It has also seen the atomic or the havoc condition after the nuclear bombing in the Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So bombing is not a nuclear situation. Bombing is not an ordinary situation, right? Bombing devastates whole humanity. So nuclear bombing is not in like you throw one nuclear bomb, I throw one nuclear bomb, the war ends. It is not a child play, or it is not a something to you can fight with. It devastates, it destroys whole humanity, right? So the Soviet ships slowed down and turned back. So Soviet said, okay, the warships that were there for to stop the USSR ships, Soviet took those ships back. And the Cuban Missile Crisis. So the Cuban Missile Crisis was the highest point of what came to be known as the Cold War. So missile crisis, in which everybody was chewing their nails that what would happen now, nobody knows what would happen next. Everybody was looking at USA, and then at USSR, then at USA, again at USSR, that what these countries will do, what they will do. What if Russia launches its missile from Cuba? What if USA repercutes it? USA also launched the missile. Then the situation would have been very grim. So it was the highest point of what came to be known as the Cold War. The Cold War referred to the competition, the tension, and a series of confrontations between the United States and the Soviet Union, backed by their respective allies. So some countries with were USA, and some countries with were Soviet Union. they both were supporting them, right? So like every leader has their supporters, so both the countries were obviously leaders, and they were having some countries as supporters or allies. Fortunately, however, it never escalated into a hot war, that is a full scale war between these two powers. There were wars in various regions with the two powers and their allies involved in warfare and in supporting regional allies, but at least the world avoided another global war or the World War III. It was avoided. So this was a very sigh situation, and everybody took a breath of relief that World War III or another nuclear devastating war is not going to happen, which would have destroyed half of the earth. If not full, then half of the earth. The Cold War was not simply a matter of power rivalries, of military alliances, and of the balance of power. These were accompanied by a real ideological conflict as well. As I told you, the capitalism and the socialism both are very far from each other. One is North Pole, one is South Pole, so they do not even attract each other, right? Most over the best, by a real ideological conflict as well, a difference over the best and the most appropriate way of organizing political, economic and social life all over the world, right? So both wanted to have ideological dominance over the world, right? The Western Alliance, headed by the US, represented the ideology of liberal democracy and capitalism, while the Eastern Alliance, headed by Soviet Union, was committed to the ideology of socialism and communism, as I told earlier, right? So both the ideologies were far from each other. They both have no similarities at all, right? So what is the Cold War? The end of the Second World War is a landmark in contemporary world politics. In 1945, the Allied forces led by the US, Soviet Union, Britain and France defeated the Axis power led by Germany, Italy and Japan, ending the Second World War, 1939 to 1945. The war had involved almost all the major powers of the world and spread out to the regions outside Europe, including Southeast Asia, China, Burma and parts of India's northeast. The war devastated the world in terms of loss of human lives and civilian property. The First World War had earlier shaken the world between 1914 and 1918. The end of the Second World War was also the beginning of the Cold War. The World War ended when the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, causing Japan to surrender. Obviously Japan was destroyed, so there was nothing left as to fight back against the Americans, so they have to surrender. Critics of the US decision to drop the bombs have argued that the US knew that Japan was about to surrender. I told this earlier, that USA knew that Japan was about to surrender, right? Because nobody in the world except USSR was having nuclear power, and to stand against the nuclear power, you should also have the nuclear power, because nuclear to repercut or to stand against the nuclear, you should also have the nuclear, and Japan was not having that. So Japan was about to surrender. Critics of the knew that Japan was about to surrender and that it was necessary to drop the bombs. It was unnecessary to drop the bombs. So dropping of the bombs was unnecessary, not required at all, right? So they suggested that the US action was intended to stop the Soviet Union from making military and political gains in Asia and elsewhere, to show Moscow that the United States was supreme. So it was just an act of ego, and to show the Soviet that USA is supreme and you cannot compete with USA, right? So they wanted to show with the bombing that Soviet, you stop there only, okay? Don't try to invade into Europe. We'll invade wherever we want because we are USA, right? So US supporters have argued that the dropping of the atomic bombs was necessary to end the war quickly and to stop further loss of American and Allied lives. So supporters of USA says that it was necessary to drop the bombs to stop the war immediately, because dropping the bomb immediately destroys the enemy completely, financially, economically, personally, geographically, everything is then it becomes a barren land, obviously, right? So whatever the motives would be, the consequences of the end of the Second World War was the rise of two new powers on the global stage. With the defeat of Germany and Japan, the devastation of Europe, and in many other parts of the world, the United States and the Soviet Union became the greatest power in the world, with the ability to influence events anywhere on earth, right? So they have the power to impact any country they want, except each other. While the Cold War was an outcome of the emergence of the US and the USSR as two superpowers rival to each other, it was also rooted in the understanding that the destruction caused by the use of atom bombs is too costly for any country to bear. So for the country that is dropping the bomb, the making of the nuclear bomb is not like making the bombs of Diwali or any other festivals. It is a huge task. It takes a lot of investment to build a nuclear bomb, and for the country which is facing the nuclear threat, or the country on which the nuclear bomb is going to be dropped, it is obviously going to be destroyed. That even a child also can tell, right? So when two rival powers are in possession of nuclear weapons capable of inflicting death and destruction unacceptable to each other, a full-fledged war is unlikely. So they knew that even if first I drop the bomb, then I have the threat of the bomb. When I will drop the bomb would have been launched. It will take some time to go. It will take some time to have the blast and show its impact. Then obviously at that particular time the bomb would have been dropped from the other side also. So I am also in an equal threat. So USA was also on an equal threat with the same as of the Soviet Union. So you cannot say that who is superior or who is inferior when two countries are nuclear powered, right? So in spite of provocations, so the Cold War, the Cuban Missile Crisis provoked the war. It tried to flame the war, but thankfully neither side would have want to risk war, since no political gains would justify the destruction of the societies. So as I said, nothing is more important than humanity or the society. So the World War III or the bombing of the nuclear bombs, again part 2 would have been stopped. So it have been stopped. So in the event of the nuclear war, both sides will be so badly harmed that it will be impossible to declare one side or the other side as the winner. Even if one of them tries to attack and disable the nuclear weapons of its rival, the other would still be left with enough nuclear weapon to inflict unacceptable destruction. This is called the logic of deterrence. Both sides having the capacity to retaliate against an attack and to cause so much destruction that neither can afford to initiate war. Thus, the Cold War, in spite of being an intense form of rivalry between great powers, remained a cold and not hot or shooting war. The deterrence relationship prevents war, but not the rivalry between powers. So the war was prevented, but the rivalry was not prevented, right? The rivalry continued till the destruction of the disintegration of the Soviet Union, right? Which we'll see in later part. So main military features of the Cold War. The two superpowers and the countries in the rival blocs led by the superpowers were expected to behave as rational and responsible actors. So when you are a leader and when you have followers, you have to act as a responsible person or a country. You cannot just take things for granted. your decision will impact even your allies. So each and every decision have to be taken with great care and advice. They were to be rational and responsible in the sense that they understood the risk in fighting wars that might involve the two superpowers, and the blocs led by them are in a deterrence relationship. Fighting wars will be massively destructive. So both USA and the Soviet Union knew that another war on a full scale or on a half scale, whatever the situation might be, would lead to massive destruction of humanity and society. Right? Responsibly, therefore, meant being restrained and avoiding the risk of another world war. In this sense, the Cold War managed to ensure human survival. That is why this is known as the Cold War. So cold means there is no destruction of humanity. It is full of sanctions and bans on each other countries, but no destruction of humanity and society will take place or have been taken place. Right? Now is the emergence of the two power blocks. The two superpowers were keen on expanding their spheres of influencing in different parts of the world. Right? So when you know that you have avoided another global war, then what would you do now? Now you will try to take countries into confidence. So both the countries started taking other countries into confidence. Right? X country, you come with us, we'll provide you military security, we'll provide you resources. Y country, you come with us, we'll provide you this better than the other country. So they were trying to influence, they were trying to influence one country and another country and so on, so as to expand their empire. Right? So in a world sharply divided between the two alliance systems, a state was supposed to remain tied to its protective superpower to limit the influence of other superpower and its allies. Right? So once the country becomes the allies, it was declared that an attack on my ally would be considered as an attack on myself, and then it will lead to a full scale war. So then the allies was like, they were very happy, like I know I am with the USA, USA is very powerful, and then hence I would be saved. Also USA will provide me security, resources, money, everything. So I am very happy. Same with USA. So same with USSR. USSR also, my dear country, I will provide you resources, and USA is also becoming a threat. We will protect you from the threat. Don't worry. We are as strong as USA. Don't worry. Nothing to worry. We are with you. So that country, okay, I am with USSR. So this was happening. This was happening in the world at that time. So they were trying to make the area, or trying to make the influence throughout the world, so as to expand their empire and to have an command over the other, over its other country. Right? The smaller states in the alliance use the link to the superpowers for their own purposes. Right? So obviously in a group, if you have a leader which is powerful than the another leader, or with any other person, then you will say, I'm in contact with USA, I will destroy you in 2 seconds. What do you want? You have seen that USA, how USA has destroyed Japan. You want to get destroyed? Step back, don't come. Right? So they were very confident. They used to link with the superpower that I am with USSR. You know how powerful USSR is. It has threatened USA. USA is reluctant to come into another war. So how powerful USSR. I am with USSR. I am an ally of USSR. So step back, go with USA only. Okay, don't try to come here and don't try to show your influence. So this used to be a conversation, imaginary conversation between the one and the other countries. They got the promise of protection, weapon and economic aid against their local rivals. as I told you, most regional neighbors with whom they had rivalries. So even if two small countries or not the superpower countries would have conflict between one or the other countries, so they would have taken the advantage of being with the ally of the superpower and threatening them that I am with certain superpower and you know the consequences of it. The alliance system led by the two superpowers therefore threatened to divide the entire world into two camps. This division happened first in Europe. Most countries of Western Europe sided with the US and those of Eastern Europe joined the Soviet camp. That is why these were also called the Western and the Eastern alliances. Right? So this is the map. The yellow part was with the USA, the red part was with the USSR, and the green part were other communist countries, and the grey part are others. So you can see major areas of the world are held by USA and USSR respectively. So in this map also you can see a clearer view of what was the first world, that is the USA or the Western Alliance, and the second world USSR, and the third world they were the non-aligned movement or the neutral countries, which we will talk in the later phase. The Western Alliance was formalized into an organization, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or abbreviated as NATO, which came into existence in April 1949. It was an association of 12 states which declared that armed attack on any one of them in Europe or North America would be regarded as an attack on all of them. Each of these states would be obliged to help the other. So you can see in this map we have seen that all those countries, the green part, they were signed into an pact which was known as the NATO or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which says that any armed war on any of the one country would be declared as an complete attack on the USA, and then you know the repercussions of it, or you know the consequences of it, right? So this was the treaty, and every state was obliged. They were obliged to help each other, and they were happy to be a part of USA, right? So next is the Eastern Alliance, known as the Warsaw Pact, was led by Soviet Union and was created in 1955, whose principal function was to counter NATO forces in Europe. So Eastern Alliance, which was signed as the part of the Warsaw Pact or known as the Warsaw Pact, their main role was to counter NATO. So they do not have any treaty or something, but their main function was to counter NATO forces in Europe. So international alliances during the Cold War era were determined by the requirements of the superpowers and the calculations of the smaller states. As noted above, Europe became the main arena of conflict between the superpowers. In some cases, the superpowers used their military power to bring countries into their respective alliances. So sometimes the first country would try to invade into another country and try to bring him into confidence that you come with us, we'll provide you better conditions and things as compared to other superpower. So Soviet integration in Eastern Europe provided an example. So Soviet integration into Eastern Europe, this was an example of bringing other countries into respective alliances. The Soviet Union used its influence in Eastern Europe, backed by the very large presence of its armies in the countries of the region, to ensure that the eastern half of the Europe remained within its sphere of influence. So USSR used his huge army to bring into confidence the the countries of the Eastern Europe that you remain with us only. So they provided them all kinds of aids, and also they were backed with huge armies of USSR. So in Eastern and Southeast Asia and in West Asia, Middle East, the United States built an alliance system called the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, SEATO, and the Central Treaty Organization, that is CENTO. So East and Southeast Asia and West Asia, Middle East, these all together with the United States build an alliance known as the SEATO and CENTO. The Soviet Union and Communist China responded with regional countries such as North Vietnam, North Korea and Iraq. So they brought into confidence these countries so as to make their influence more than USA. The Cold War threatened to divide the world into two alliances. Under these circumstances, many of newly independent countries, after gaining their independence from the colonial powers such as Britain and France, were worried that they would lose their freedom as soon as they gain formal independence. So countries like India, for example, was very worried, like Britain has left us just now with independence and now we have to join either of the alliances, but so we will not be left with freedom, we will not taste the freedom, we will not be able to taste the freedom, how freedom tastes, because now here we'll be leaving the colonial rule, then we have to join with either of the forces or either of the superpowers. So cracks and splits within the alliances were quick to appear. Communist China quarreled with the USSR towards the late 1950s, and in 1969 they fought a brief war over a territorial dispute. So this is not something which comes as a shock or something. China has that expansionist policy of taking other countries' land. Recent example is with India, right? So China is a country which is in news for quarreling. So it quarreled with USSR. So it was an ally of USSR, but it quarreled in 1969. So the other important development was the non-aligned movement, or the NAM, which gave the newly independent countries a way of staying out of the alliances. So non-alignment movement was developed for this particular purpose, that if you don't want to stay with the first world or the second world, you come and join the third world, that is neutral. So now a question arises that why do superpower needed allies? After all, with their nuclear weapon and regular armies, they were so powerful that the combined power of most of the smaller states in Asia and Africa, and even in Europe, were in no match with the superpowers. So because they were backed by regular armies and nuclear, so they do not require any support, but they require. Why? Because the smaller states were helpful for the superpowers in gaining access to vital resources such as oil and minerals. So many of these smaller countries were having huge capacity or huge stock of resources of oils and minerals, which was important to regulate movements of tanks, of machineries, etc. Right? So territory from where the superpower could launch their weapons and troops. So they needed territory which would be closer to their enemy territory, like for example Cuba, which was very close to USA. So they tried to bring into confidence such smaller countries so that they could set up their bases and launch systems from that country, locations from where they could spy on each other, right? So a country which is closer to your enemy country would act obviously as a country to spy on that particular country. For example, Cuba would have been the best example, right? And then economic support, in that many smaller allies together could help pay for the military expenses. So smaller countries together pay for their military expenses, and in return they got security of all kinds. So this was all happening as a trend in the world. So they were also important for ideological reasons. The loyalty of allies suggested that the superpowers were winning the war of ideas as well. The liberal democracy and capitalism were better than socialism and communism, or vice versa. So if one country is coming with another country, so it becomes in supporter of the country, which suggests that okay, we have some followers with us, or we have some allies with us who support our ideology as well, right? So when if you are with a particular person, you are because of his power as well as because you support his ideology also, or either of the one reason, because you are influenced with his power or because you are influenced with his ideology. Many of the followers were with Mahatma Gandhi. Why? Because they were influenced by his ideology of non-violence, right? So they knew that with violence anything can be taken, but with non-violence also this was a new concept. So such example, right? Now we'll see the arenas of the Cold War. The Cuban Missile Crisis was only one of the several crises that occurred during the Cold War. So several other crises like this took place in the later phases. The Cold War also led to several shooting wars, but fortunately these crises and wars did not lead to another world war. So there were several other shooting wars. Shooting wars are like small scale wars, but they include weapons and attacks of like normal wars, but they are not into a global war or like it does not result into a world war. The two superpowers were poised for direct confrontations in Korea 1950-1953, Berlin 1958 to 1962, the Congo the early 1960s, and in several other places. So in these places the hot wars or the shooting wars took place at several times. Crisis deepened as neither of the parties involved was willing to back down. So neither USA nor USSR was willing to reluctant or to take themselves as inferior to another country or the another superpower. So they were reluctant to have another global war, but nobody was reluctant to have another. So they were not reluctant to step down. So arenas of the Cold War referred to the areas where crises and wars occurred or threatened to occur between the alliance systems, but did not cross certain limits. So everybody knew that these are our limits. We have to fight within the limits. Fight as much as you can, but within the limits, which does not lead to the hot war or the global war, right? So many lives were lost. Obviously in the war many lives are lost. So in some of these arenas like Korea, Vietnam and Afghanistan, but the world was spared with a nuclear war and global hostilities. In some cases diplomatic communication between the superpowers could not be sustained and contributed to the misunderstandings. So many of the smaller countries or the allies were impressed at first but left at second because they had some conflicts or they were not able to understand their superpower in the later phase, or the superpower backed by helping them. So these all things were happening during the later 90s. So countries outside the two blocks, that is the non-aligned countries, played a role in reducing Cold War conflicts and averting some grave crises. Jawaharlal Nehru, one of the key leaders of the NAM, played a crucial role in mediating between the two Koreas. In the Congo crisis, the UN Secretary General played a key mediatory role. By and large, it was the realization on a superpower's part that war by all means should be avoided that made them exercise restraint and behave more responsibly in international affairs. As the Cold War rolled from one area to another, the logic of restraint was increasingly evident. Huge stock of arms were considered necessary to prevent war from taking place. So to prevent a war, you should be ever ready, right? For example, in the recent conflict in June 2020 with India and China, India was full battle ready to confront China at all cost. But it was in real terms, both the countries, India and China, were reluctant to get into a war because war leads to a huge destruction. So next is the two sides understood that war might occur in spite of restraint. So despite you restraint and take all the measures to stop the war might happen, right? Like either side might miscalculate the number of weapons in the possession of the other side. They might misunderstand the intentions of the other side. Besides, what if there was a nuclear accident? What would happen if someone fired off a nuclear weapon by mistake, if a soldier mischievously shot off a weapon deliberately to start a war? What if an accident occurred with a nuclear weapon? How would the leaders of that country know it was an accident and not an act of stabbage by the enemy, or that a missile not landed from the other side? So these all were types of questions that were taking place into the minds of both the superpowers, that is the USA and the USSR. So they were surrounded by such questions, that what would happen now and what would happen in the next second. In time, therefore, the US and USSR decided to collaborate in limiting or eliminating certain kinds of nuclear and non-nuclear weapons. A stable balance of weapons, they decided, could be maintained through arms control. So to avoid such kind of situation, such kind of nuclear situation, whether accidental or stabbage or to be done in a strategic manner, whatever the situation may be, so they decided to control it through arms control. So starting in the 1960s, the two sides signed 3 significant agreements within a decade. These were the Limiting Test Ban Treaty, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. Thereafter, the superpowers held several rounds of arms limitation talks and signed several more treaties to limit their arms. Now we'll see the Arms Control Treaty. So first is the Limited Test Ban Treaty, or LTBT. So according to LTBT, it banned nuclear weapon tests in the atmosphere, in outer space, and underwater. So it banned the use of nuclear weapon or testing the nuclear weapon. Right, once you have made the nuclear missile, you cannot confront it like we have made the nuclear missile. You have to test it also. You have to test the usage and the power of that particular nuclear missile. It was signed by the US, UK and USSR in Moscow on 5th August 1963 and entered into force on 10th October 1963. Next is the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT. It allows only the nuclear weapon states to have nuclear weapons and stop others from acquiring them. So a country who is having a nuclear weapon or nuclear weapon in abundance cannot sell the nuclear weapon to another state or another country. So the trade of nuclear stopped. Like for example, USSR has installed its missile in Cuba, but now with this treaty they cannot put it. Neither they can put the missile in Cuba or in any other countries who are having allies with the USSR, nor they could give them the nuclear missile. You keep it, and whenever USA does something, you launch the nuclear missile. Same with the USA. USA cannot use any of its allies countries as a base for having nuclear there, and neither they can sell the nuclear weapon to its allies countries and tell them ki you launch it whenever the USSR does some mischievous activities, right? So for the purpose of the NPT, a nuclear weapon state is one which has manufacturers and exploded a nuclear weapon or other nuclear explosives device prior to 1 January 1967. So according to NPT, only nuclear weapon states. So what was the condition of nuclear weapon states? What was the definition of nuclear weapon states? So the definition was this: that country of a nuclear weapon state is which has manufacturers and exploded a nuclear weapon or other nuclear explosive device prior to 1 January 1967. So no new tests would have been taken place after 1 January 1967. So there were 5 nuclear weapon states at that particular time: USA, USSR, Britain, France and China. Okay, then it was signed in Washington, London and Moscow on 1st July 1968 and entered into force on 5th March 1970 and then extended indefinitely in 1995. Next is Strategic Arms Limitation Talks first, SALT 1. The first round of the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks began in November 1969. So, the Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev and the US President Richard Nixon signed the following in Moscow on 26 May 1962. So, what were the components of SALT 1? First, Treaty on the Limitation of Anti-Ballistic Missile Systems, ABM Treaty. Right, so no treaty would have been, no two countries can sign into a treaty for the exchange or something related to anti-ballistic missiles, so and limit its anti-ballistic missile system, right? So one could not now enhance its anti-ballistic missile, but they have to limit their anti-ballistic missile system. Second, Interim Agreement on the Limitation of Strategic Offensive Arms. So then there was interim agreement, another agreement which was internal and which was on strategic offensive arms. Next is they entered into force on 3rd October 1972, right? So this was SALT 1. Next is SALT 2 or Strategic Arms Limitation Talks 2, SALT 2. So the second round of the Strategic Arm Limitation Talks began in November 1972. The USA President Jimmy Carter and the Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev signed the Treaty on the Limitation of Strategic Offensive Arms in Vienna on 18th June 1979. So this was another round of the Strategic Arm Limitation Talks that took place on 18th June 1979. Next is Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty first or START 1. Treaty signed by the USSR President Mikhail Gorbachev and USA President George Bush Sr. on the reduction and limitation of strategic offensive arms in Moscow on 31st July 1991. Right? Then we have the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty 2 or START 2, in which treaty was signed by the Russian President Boris Yeltsin and the US President George Bush Sr. on the reduction and limitation of strategic offensive arms in Moscow on 3rd January 1993. Next is Challenge to Bipolarity. Now so this all was taking place like all the countries have to get associated with the either of the first world, that is the USA, or with the second world, that is the USSR. But what happened is there were certain challenges to bipolarity. For example, cracks developed, we have discussed in the previous slide. For example, certain cracks developed, certain countries backstabbed like China, and another big challenge was non-aligned movement. So now we will talk about the non-aligned movement. So the Cold War tended to divide the world into two rival alliances. So the Cold War has divided the world into two, and each country was obliged to get with one of the countries, or they were brought into by force, or you can very smaller countries but were brought by force who were not anything by themselves, right? And some countries were impressed by either of the superpowers to come with us, right? They were said, we will provide you certain things and you come with us. So this was all happening. So the non-aligned offered the newly decolonized countries of the Asia, Africa and Latin America a third option not to join either alliance, because they knew all those, like for example Asia, Africa and Latin America, these decolonized countries of, like for example India, Pakistan was not at that time, India and other countries who were once into the hands of colonial power. So they knew the meaning of independence. They have realized how was the situation, or what a barbaric situation would be if you are under the hands of a superpower or someone who has control on you. So being in the hands of a superpower or being into the hands of a colonial is none other than the same. You are under someone and you have to act according to their rules and regulations. So it would have been pretty difficult. Like, once you get free from the colonial rule and you came to know tomorrow you have to join either of the superpower. So this is something which has come into the mind of the leaders of the NAM, and they created the non-aligned movement. So the roots of NAM or non-aligned movement went back to the friendship between three leaders: Yugoslavia's Josip Broz Tito, India's Jawaharlal Nehru, and Egypt's leader Gamal Abdel Nasser, who held a meeting in 1956. So they all three met together and formed a non-aligned movement that we were earlier in the colonial rule. Now we won't be joining any of the superpower. Rather, we would be a country which will be declined as non-aligned. So non-aligned. So the term non-aligned, we won't be aligned with any of the countries, right? But we will be supporting them with ideologies, but not with full support, right? So then Indonesia's Sukarno and Ghana's Kwe Nkrumah strongly supported them. So these two other leader, Indonesia's leader and Ghana's leader, strongly supported them, and hence they became a 5 persons to form an organization or to form a movement which was known as the non-aligned movement or the Third World. These 5 leaders came to be known as the 5 founders of non-aligned movement. So these 5 you can see in this picture. These all are the 5 leaders of the non-aligned movement. Let us see each of them one by one. So first is Josip Broz Tito, 1890 to 1980, President of Yugoslavia, 1945 to 1980, fought against Germany in World War II, was communist by nature, maintained some distance from the Soviet Union, and forged unity in Yugoslavia. Next is our own first Prime Minister, Mr. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, 1889 to 1964. He was the first Prime Minister of independent India in 1949 to 64. Made efforts for Asian unity, decolonization, nuclear disarmament. So main credit of nuclear disarmament goes to Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Then sorry for the mistake. Then advocated peaceful coexistence for securing world peace. So Jawaharlal Nehru or Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was one of the person who believed in world peace and harmony amongst the people and supported that equally. For that he made steps and progressive steps towards nuclear disarmament, because with nuclear power in hand you cannot support national peace. In one hand you are taking nuclear and another you are saying that let there be world peace. It is not possible. Next is Gamal Abdel Nasser, 1918 to 1970, ruled Egypt from 1962 to 1970, espoused the causes of Arab nationalism, socialism and anti-imperialism, nationalized the Suez Canal, leading to an international conflict in 1956. Next is Sukarno, 1901 to 1970, first President of Indonesia, 1945 to 1965, led the freedom struggle, espoused the causes of socialism and anti-imperialism, then organized the Bandung Conference and was overthrown in a military coup. Last is Kwe Nkrumah, 1909 to 1972, first President of Ghana, 1959 to 1966. He led the freedom movement, advocated the causes of socialism and African unity, opposed neo-colonialism and was also removed in a military coup. So all the 5 leaders of the non-aligned movement who formed the non-aligned movement have some common threads of ideology in them. So that is why they came together and formed the non-aligned movement. So the first non-aligned summit was held in Belgrade in 1961. This was the culmination of at least 3 factors: cooperation among these 5 countries, growing Cold War tensions and its widening arenas, and the dramatic entry of many newly decolonized African countries into the international arena. By 1960, there were 16 new African members in the UN. The first summit was attended by 25 member states. Over the years, the membership of Non-Aligned Movement or NAM has expanded. The last meeting, the 18th summit, was held in Baku, Azerbaijan. It included delegation from more than 120 countries. And first virtual summit was also held, which took place, I don't remember that which country, but from our part it was our Vice President Mr. Venkaiah Naidu who led the summit from Indian counterpart. Next is, as non-aligned grew into a popular international movement, countries of various different political systems and interests joined it. This made the movement less homogeneous and also made it more difficult to define in very neat and precise terms that what did it really stand for. Increasingly, non-aligned movement was easier to define in terms of what it was not. It was not about being a member of an alliance. So despite being more clear what non-aligned movement is all about, it was clear that what it was not all about. So it was not all about joining any of the 2 superpowers or any of the first or the second world. As simple as that. The policy of staying away from alliances should not be considered isolationism or neutrality, right? So it should not be considered isolationism or neutrality, in living in isolation or being neutral. Non-aligned is not isolationism, since isolationism means remaining aloof from world affairs. So being isolated is not being aware of anything that is happening in the world. But it was not with respect to these 5 countries. They were aware what was happening in the world, right? So it was not, they were living in isolation. So isolationism means sums up the foreign policy of the US from the American War of Independence in 1787 up to the beginning of the First World War. In comparison, the non-aligned countries, including India, played an active role in mediating between the 2 rival alliances in the cause of peace and stability. Rather being isolated from the world or from the 2 alliances, rival alliances, they were trying to act as a mediator and to neutralize their enemyship and bring peace and stability. Their strength was based on their unity and their resolve to remain non-aligned despite the attempt by the 2 superpowers to bring them into their alliances. So both the alliances tried their best to bring the third world countries with them, either of them, but they, despite of many attempts, they failed, right? So non-aligned is also not neutrality. So the policy of staying away from alliances should not be considered isolationism or extremely sorry, right? Non-aligned is also not neutrality. So neutrality refers principally to a policy of staying out of war. So they do not get involved in wars and do not take any position on the appropriateness or morality of war. So this is not like you can see in 1962 we had war with China, then continuous wars with Pakistan. So being neutral was not the policy of India, but it was to be neutral or to be balanced, or having a balanced approach. In simple terms we can say to have a balanced approach with respect to first or the second world. They did not get involved in wars, and it was not like they did not get involved in wars or do not take any position on the morality of a war. Non-aligned states, including India, were actually involved in wars for various reasons and also worked to prevent wars between others and tried to end wars that had broken out. So India actively took part, and except 1962 India had won all the wars, right? So in 1962 there was some kind of mishappening or some kind of miscommunication between the forces and the leaders, otherwise we would have been won that war also, right? Next is new international economic order. The non-aligned countries were more than merely mediators during the Cold War. The challenge for most of the non-aligned countries, a majority of them were categorized as the least developed countries or LDCs, was to be more developed economically and to lift the people out of poverty. Economic development was also vital for the independence of the new countries, as they were colonial in nature, so they had been destroyed economically. In terms of others also, socially they were also destroyed, but more in terms of economically, because if you are economically strengthened, then you can other things you can strengthen by default, or with time you will strengthen it. But economical, if you are destroyed economically, then it becomes very difficult for you to stand back again. So without sustainable development, a country could not be truly free. As I said, it would remain dependent on the richer countries, including the colonial powers, from which potential freedom had been achieved. So sustainable development is very necessary, that is economic development. In layman terms you can say economic development. So being developed economically is very important, unless you are not free, unless you are somewhat in the hands of other countries, because then you have to export technology, then you have to import technology, right, and other things from the other countries, so you have to depend on them. So the idea of a new international economic order, NEO, originated with this realization. The United National Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, brought out a report in 1972 titled Towards a New Trade Policy for Development. The report proposed a reform of the global trading system as to give the LDCs control over their natural resources exploited by the developed Western countries. So it said that let the countries who had gained independence, let them take control of their natural resources, so that they can earn some amount from it and develop their country economically, develop their country in terms of all means, right? Socially, economically, politically, all terms, mainly economically. Then obtain access to Western markets so that the LDC could sell their products and therefore make trade more beneficial for the poorer countries. So once they have their natural resources in hand, they can produce some products from the natural resources that they have gained, and then they can trade with the Western countries and get some profit which will be beneficial for themselves. Next is reduce the cost of technology from the Western countries. So at that particular time, importing of technology was a very big issue and it was a costly affair. So it suggested that the technology from the Western countries, the cost should be reduced, and to provide LDCs with a greater role in international economic institutions, and LDCs should be provided a greater role. Gradually, the nature of non-aligned changed to give greater importance to economic issues. In 1961, at the first summit of Belgrade, economic issues had not been very important. By the mid 1970s, they had become the most important issues. So every country, whether it is every countries that were the part of the third world, now had the burden on themselves to develop themselves economically. Therefore, now they have changed their focus or agenda towards how they can develop themselves economically by the help of both the superpowers. So as a result, non-aligned movement became an economic pressure group. So it was a race, like if you support non-aligned movement, they'll support you ideologically, right? So both the first world and the second world countries took this opportunity and tried to help the third world countries with all their efforts. However, by the late 1980s, the NEO initiative had faded mainly because of the stiff opposition from the developed countries who acted as a united group, while the non-aligned countries struggled to maintain their unity in the face of this opposition. So despite all these efforts, that was the front phase only, like we are ready to help you, but internally it was like they were reluctant to help the third world country because they were not with them, right? Instead they would like to help those countries which were their allies. So they were reluctant to help them, both, whether USA or USSR, both were reluctant to help the third world countries and to help them developing their economic pillars. Okay, so they acted as a united group with the non-aligned countries, and they were saying that first you come with us, you become our ally, we will help you to gain economic, we will help you in developing economic resources. Next is India and the Cold War. So as a leader of non-aligned movement, so India was the leader of one of the leaders of the non-aligned movement. India responds to the ongoing Cold War at twofold levels. So India twofoldedly confronted the Cold War. That particularly at one level it took particular care in staying away from the two alliances. So it stayed somewhat neutral, not completely neutral, but it stayed somewhat neutral and said that we are neither with the two superpowers, we are a third world country, and we are with everyone and not with anyone. So it was like some situation like this, right? In the second, it raised its voice against the newly decolonized countries becoming part of these alliances, and also it didn't become a part of any of the two superpowers and stopped the newly decolonized countries. Ki sir, recently you have become an independent country from a colony, do not join the superpowers, as again you will be trapped into the hands of an superior force which will embark its rules and regulations on you, and you won't be able to handle them. So first taste the independence and then join the superpower as per the needs of your country. So India had a twofold approach. Then India's policy was neither negative nor passive, as Nehru remained the world as Nehru remained in the world. Non-aligned was not a policy of fleeing away. So non-alignment was not fleeing away with the world affairs, but it took part in the world affairs. It was not being isolated or isolationism, but it was to took part in the world affairs and to balance the approach. On the contrary, India was in favor of actively intervening in world affairs to soften Cold War rivalries. So India was to soften everyone. India was like to soften the situation and to develop the parameters of social, economic and political basis. To develop the country was the primary agenda of India, right? Then India tried to reduce the differences between the alliances and thereby prevented difference from escalating into a full-scale war. Indian diplomats and leaders were often used to communicate and mediate between Cold War rivals, such as in the Korea War in the early 1950s. So main importance, you can see the Korean War, how India acted in the Korean Wars. So this was how India tried to mediate between the Cold War rivals. So it is important to remember that India chose to involve other members of the non-aligned group in this mission. During the Cold War, India repeatedly tried to activate those regional and international organizations which were not a part of alliance led by the US and the USSR. Nehru reposed great faith in a genuine commonwealth of free and cooperation nations that would play a positive role in softening in not ending the Cold War. So actually Pandit Nehru wanted to soften the Cold War but not to end it, because there are some benefits in the Cold War that you you develop, you have a sense of, when you have a sense of competition, you try to improve day by day. Like for example, in our area also, in our civil services, we know how much competition there is, so we try to improve it day by day. But for example, consider a situation, there are 100 posts and there are only you can say 200 candidates, so then your competition will become low. Then you have a competition with 2 people only. Here you have a competition with 15,000 people on an average. So Cold War is good, but not in the situation that it becomes a hot war. So India tried, especially Pandit Nehru, tried to soften the Cold War. So non-aligned was not, as some suggest, a noble international cause which had little to do with India's real interest. So it has a very little self-interest. India had a very little self-interest, right? A non-aligned posture was served India's interests very directly in at least 2 ways. First, non-aligned allowed India to take international decisions and stances that serve its interest rather than the interest of the superpowers and their allies. So now, with the help of non-aligned, India gained some international platform. India gained international respect in the international platforms, right? Decisions of India were considered as a mark of respect, and India was seen as a country of importance. Second, India was often able to balance one superpower against the other, right? So when the graph of the confrontations, or the graph of, you can say, the talks rose high, India tried its best to bring that graph down. If India felt ignored or unduly pressurized by one superpower, it could tilt towards the other. Neither alliance system could take India for granted or bully it. So India, and now also, India is a very, very important country. India is, like you can say, emerging superpower, and it is, like one of the leaders also said, it is impossible to consider one's country or one's trade without India. India is diplomatically, scientifically, military, every defense partner, everywhere India is important, right? Then India's policy of non-alignment was criticized on a number of counts. For example, first, India's non-aligned was said to be unprincipled. So many of the researchers have said that non-aligned movement did not have certain principles or certain guidelines. In the name of pursuing its national interest, India, it was said, often refused to take a firm stand on crucial international issues. So it is said that in certain international issues, for its self-interest, India refused to take some stand. So obviously, first we will think about ourselves, na? Then we will think about others. Why India will think about a situation where it has some extremely sorry, where it has some disadvantages for himself, right? So second, it is suggested that India was inconsistent and took contradictory postures. Having criticized others for joining alliances, India signed the Treaty of Friendship in August 1971 with the USSR for 20 years. So this is somewhat a friendship for trade and defense and logistics. Why we approached USA said, we are not giving you, but we needed something, na? How India can no longer begin without arms and ammunition? India needed support, economical support, financial support, and USA provided it. And when USA is providing it, obviously we'll tilt towards the either side. So I think this is criticism by USA only. So this was regarded particularly by outside observers, as I said, as virtually joining the Soviet alliance system. The Indian government's view was that India needed diplomatic and possibly military support during the Bangladesh crisis. So India was also facing situations, right? India cannot act as a balancing or as a court and to neutralize or to solve the dispute between the two worlds. Here Pakistan was a very big headache at that particular time. China 1962, then Pakistan started emerging as war, then Bangladesh liberation. So India was also having lots of problems, and it needed diplomatic support, it needed military support. So it needed one of the superpowers to favor, and no superpower was favoring at that particular time, being a neutral state. So they were saying, you come with us, you become our ally, we'll support you. But India said, no, we don't want to. We want to become a non-aligned country. So then you go and carry on with yourself. They both the US and USSR said, like I am telling, like I was there. Like then non-aligned as a strategy evolved in the Cold War context, and with the disintegration of the USSR and the end of the Cold War in 1991. So with the disintegration of the USSR, which we will see in our next lecture, the Cold War came to an end. The non-aligned, both as the international movement and as the core of India's foreign policy, lost some of its earlier relevance and effectiveness. So main principle or the main function of non-aligned movement was to neutralize or to confront the situation or to balance the situation between the two countries, so that it does not result into another war or the global war. And when one of the superpower came down, its power got neutralized, automatically non-aligned movement lost its importance. Still it's there, but it is not as relevant as it was at that particular, because it was created for that particular situation only. So however, non-aligned contained some core values and enduring ideas. Yeah, obviously it was based on the recognition that decolonized states share a historical affiliation and can become a powerful force if they come together. So all the Indian leaders through non-aligned movement thought that all the colonized countries that have recently got independence should come together and act as a forcing power. It means that the poor and often very small countries of the world need not become followers of any of the big powers, that they could pursue an independent foreign policy. So they need not have to go with either of the superpowers, and they can have their neutral policies, right? So it was also based on a resolve to democratize the international system by thinking about an alternative world order to redress existing inequities. These core ideas remain relevant even after the Cold War has ended. So the core ideas of non-aligned movement had importance or existed, or you can say were relevant even after the Cold War ended, but were not that much relevant, or to count on a scale, it were not that much efficiency or relevancy as it was during the Cold War time, right? So this was all about the details of the Cold War. I think I have explained much about the Cold War. This was not even required during, but the Cold War is the beginning of the international relations, so it was important to discuss, right? So the PDF of the same, the notes, the multiple choice questions, and the crisp note, revision notes, mind maps are shared on the group. And if you are having any doubt, you are welcome to ask them on the group itself. And as this was my first lecture, I know I have made a lot of mistakes while recording this lecture, and I apologize for that, and I hope that you all will tell me how the video was, and whatever the mistakes I have done, I'll not repeat it in the next lecture. I'll keep that in mind. And this platform, only UPSC Civil Services Simplified, is made for such a purpose that all those aspirants whose dreams are shattered just because of the expensive coaching centers whom they cannot afford, or especially in the COVID-19 situation, the situation that is going on continuously, the crisis, the pandemic, many persons have lost their jobs, and many aspirants are there whose parents have lost their job. So this platform is just so that they do not shatter their dream, or they do not close the eyes of the vision that they had seen themselves of becoming one of the bureaucrats, or you can say a helper or a civil servant in a democratic country, India. So I will try my best to give everything that is possible for you all, and at times I may be wrong at certain places, so you can please pardon me as your small brother for all those mistakes that I have confronted in this lecture, and I'll make sure that I'll not confront it in any other lecture. All the suggestions, doubts, any improvements, any ideas are most welcome on the group, or you can personally mail, right? So this was all about the Cold War. In the next we'll see the downfall of the USSR, right? And we'll discuss the details about the same. Thank you, have a great day, and please stay at home and stay safe from this deadly virus. Thank you everyone.